A Minnesota father will serve less than a decade behind bars for beating his infant daughter to death and blaming the baby's injuries on one of the family's cats. 41-year-old Christopher Henderson was sentenced to 15 years in prison after entering an authored plea to 1 count of second-degree unintentional murder in the brutal slaying of 2-month-old Adeline Henderson. An authored plea is functionally equivalent to a guilty plea, but it allows the defendant to maintain their claim of innocence whilst conceding that the state has sufficient evidence to convict them at trial. So my take on it is an authored plea is exactly the same as a guilty plea. That's my take on it. Under Minnesota state law, Henderson, who was credited with 526 days already served, is only required to serve 2/3 of his sentence in prison, which amounts to around 8.5 years. The remainder of the sentence will be served on supervised release. So he's been sentenced to 15 years in jail, which is a very short amount of time for someone who has, in essence, pleaded guilty to murdering their own 2-month-old child, Adeline Henderson. 15 years in jail, but he's already been in jail following his arrest for 526 days, so that's give or take a year and a half, 18 months, something along those lines. And in Minnesota state law, for some bizarre reason, some prisoners, perhaps not all, but some prisoners, including this scumbag, Christopher Henderson, is only required to serve 2/3 of the sentence in prison and the rest outside of prison. So 2/3 of 15 years is 10 years minus 18 months is 8.5 years. Not very long, is it? 8.5 years. Okay, he spent 18 months in jail already, but even so, 8.5 years for taking the life of his 2-month-old baby girl, Adeline Henderson. Not good enough. As part of a plea deal, prosecutors dismissed several other felony charges, including manslaughter, first-degree assault, and malicious punishment of a child. So this guy, Christopher Henderson, has been given way too much leniency. He was given the opportunity to offer a plea, an authored plea, effectively a guilty plea. He was given that opportunity. He's been given the opportunity to have 1/3 of his sentence thrown out of the window, effectively. He was given the opportunity of having time served counted as credit. It's a joke. It's not a funny joke, it's a sick joke. In my mind, this does not constitute justice for the death of Adeline Henderson. What about Adeline's mother? Other family members that are devastated by her murder, and they've got to learn that the father that took her life is only going to spend a short amount of time in jail, and then he'll be free to walk the streets. It's not good enough. It's not justice. I'm going to go through some of the details that led to the death of Adeline Henderson. You may not want to listen to this part of the video. On the evening of September the 23rd, 2021, Christopher Henderson and the child's mother brought the baby, Adeline Henderson, to a local hospital with a series of horrific injuries, including 2 broken legs, multiple fractured ribs, and bleeding in the brain. Due to the severity of the infant's injuries, medical personnel decided to transfer the child to the Mayo Clinic's child facility in Rochester for more specialized treatment. Before moving on, I'm just going to repeat that. 2 broken legs, multiple fractured ribs, bleeding in the brain. What sicko is capable of inflicting those injuries on a baby, on their own child? And what the F is wrong with Minnesota for allowing such a psychopath to walk in the streets again in a mere 8.5 years? That is a huge failing from Minnesota. You get a big L. In an interview with investigators, the mother said that her daughter was fine before she left home for work earlier that day. She said she fed the child in the morning, then put her back down to sleep and left for work. The mother worked until around 6 p.m, but the father texted her at around 5 p.m. to inform her that he had caught the family's 19-pound cat laying on the infant daughter. It was the cat's fault, according to the father. When the mother got home, she said that her daughter's eyes looked like they were bulged out of her head. The mother said she called her own mother, and after discussing her daughter's condition, decided to bring her to the emergency room. They arrived at the hospital at around 7 p.m. So the mother didn't rush back home because the father didn't give any indication that it was required to rush back home. The father didn't rush Adeline to hospital. The father didn't react to Adeline's eyes bulging out of her head. The father reacted by blaming the cat. Investigators interviewed the father. He initially told investigators that he had no idea how his daughter sustained her injuries. Nothing to do with me. Must have been the family cat. Forgive my facetiousness. I'm not trying to be funny. I'm just trying to point out the disgusting ridiculousness of the situation, of inhumanity. The psychopath, the father, Christopher Henderson, beating his child, 2-month-old Adeline Henderson, to death, I'm sorry to say. And he blames the cat. Nothing to do with him, must have been the cat. There are individuals like this walking the earth, and this scumbag is going to be walking the earth, going to be walking Minnesota in a mere 8.5 years due to a failing from your judges or whoever it is that's responsible for the sentencing. That is a massive failing, Minnesota. That needs to be looked at. That needs to be rectified. There needs to be a review of this sentence. This is probably one of the worst situations that I've come through, that I've come over. He was sentenced to 10 years in jail. That's ridiculous. Doctors who had treated the little girl told police that the infant's injuries were consistent with non-accidental trauma and could not have been caused by a cat. Quite obviously, how many cats could break both legs of a child, could cause multiple fractured ribs, and could cause bleeding to the brain? Not possible, is it? Hospital officials informed police that the infant showed little to no brain activity after 6 days of treatment. Hospital officials categorized Adeline's chances for recovery as grim, which prompted end-of-life conversations. The baby was ultimately pronounced dead November the 3rd. If I understand correctly, that is without hospital intervention. If I'm articulating that accurately, I mean to say that the hospital did not pull the plug on baby Adeline, that she did die due to her injuries. In a follow-up interview with detectives, Henderson eventually admitted that he might have been a little rough with Adeline when changing her diaper. He further admitted that on the day his daughter was hospitalized, that he had cradled the child face down in his arms and struck her back more forcefully than usual for what was estimated around 5 minutes. When asked if he struck his daughter with enough force to break her ribs, he said that he did. So I'm going to comment on that. So the scumbag blames the cat, denies any knowledge, then seemingly the investigators, I'm going to say, coax a confession from him, but they had to drag it out of him. I watch interrogations on YouTube. There's a lot of channels out there that are considered, I think it's JCS inspired videos, and you see interrogations as they occur. Some are more interesting than others, but one thing that I've seen multiple times from watching the police interrogations is that the police tell the suspects that it is very important for the suspects to come forward and tell the truth, because doing so shows remorse, and not showing remorse is not good in regards to sentencing. So this is what I've seen police officers tell suspects. Something along the lines, of course I'm not going to get this 100% right, but something along the lines that if a suspect continues to lie and continues to deny wrongdoing when they are found guilty, that in so doing, the notes from the officers, the investigators, the detectives will be passed on to, I believe, the district attorneys or such, be passed on to other people within the legal process, and essentially it will be a matter of saying, hey look, this scumbag is not only guilty, but they denied guilt all the way through, and in so doing they've not shown any remorse, and that being the case, when it comes to sentencing, they deserve no leniency. If someone shows a degree of remorse, then I believe when it comes to sentencing, there can be leniency applied on the basis that, okay, this person is guilty of this heinous crime, but they're not a bad person. This was a once-off. It won't happen again. They understand the wrongdoing. They regret it deeply. So that's the kind of thing that I've seen in these interrogation videos. Perhaps the police officers were telling porky pies to the suspects. I don't know. Perhaps I'm a bit naive. Perhaps I've got some of that wrong. But my point there is this scumbag, Christopher Henderson, denied any involvement in regards to the injuries that led to the death of his daughter, Adeline Henderson, 2 months of age. He denied it. Denied any knowledge. He blamed the family cat for these horrific injuries. And even when he confesses, it's a half-hearted confession. Oh yeah, I might have done it. Yeah, could have been me. Could have been, but it wouldn't have been intentional. So that's not coming forward and being open and honest about the situation. That's trying to cover his arse as much as possible. That's not showing remorse. So why did he get such leniency? Again, he entered an offered plea, functionally equivalent to a guilty plea, but only sentenced to 15 years in prison. And in Minnesota, certainly in this case, in some cases, the convicted don't need to serve all of the time in prison, only 2/3 of the time in prison. Makes no sense. So again, this guy's getting out in 8.5 years. So look forward to that, Minnesota. You're going to have another child murderer walking the streets in 8.5 years' time. Going to wrap things up at this point. Of course, full condolences to the mother, the grandparents, family, the friends, all those that did love Adeline Henderson, that were there to care for her. A disgusting tragedy. I do hope that there's a review of the sentencing. It's crazy. It's a travesty. It's going to just further fuel the anger that is felt by the family, those that loved Adeline. It's disgusting. If you appreciate the coverage, please do like, comment, subscribe, share the video as you see fit. Consider joining the membership. I have a grand total of 0 members. I'd love to get some. If you're happy to become a member, that would be great. Don't watch too many of my videos, please. Watch 1 or 2, then give it a break. You're even allowed to unsub every now and then, but only if you sub back. And I say that because the topics that I cover are incredibly dark, and I think I do a good job. I get a lot of comments of people complimenting the respectful way that I cover the topics. Not everyone agrees with my take on things, of course, all the time, but the intention to be respectful is always there, despite my occasional facetiousness. But yeah, I'm always respectful, and that's always going to remain the case. So that being the case, this is an opportunity to consider, to look at some cases that don't necessarily get a lot of attention, that otherwise get ignored fundamentally by the media, by other true crime channels. I think it's somewhat fair to say. So this is an opportunity to reflect on these awful situations, and in so doing pay respect to the victim, the victim's families, to consider aspects such as sentencing, try to get a little bit more educated, and feel free to educate me in the comments if I've got a misunderstanding, or if you feel that I should view things in a different way, or that things could be viewed in a different way. Please let me know. Fill in any gaps. That would be great. But yeah, I think it's nice to go over these topics as having a few moments of reflection, but we can't only focus on these topics. We need to move away from them. We need to do something more uplifting, whatever that happens to be. Could be going for a walk, could be watching some comedy, watching the latest drama on Netflix, whatever it happens to be that floats your boat, to do something a little bit more uplifting, bring in a little bit more light into your life so that we're not pulled down too much from this. So please don't watch too many of my videos, but of course do subscribe, and if you do unsub, then come back when you're ready. But I'll thank you for your time. Take care.